This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this. Welcome back to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. My name is Kurt North, returning to discuss another episode of the X-Files Season 8. Joining me is literary critic John Kenneth Muir, back from his views and discussion with Carl Sweeney last year on the episode Closure. John, how are things going?
Very well, Kurt. I'm having a great time. I'm on my spring break here in North Carolina, but it's 40 degrees, so I'm just staying in my house.
So coming to talk to me. Thank you very much.
Right. I am looking forward to this today very much.
So before we start, though, I think as we talk to any guest that comes on, Carl, Tony, Sarah, and I have actually talked quite a bit on season 8 now, being that this is episode 12, so we're halfway through the season effectively. What do you make to this first half? Because this is pretty much the end of the first half of the season. The next episode is per annum, so a lot goes on after that, and it becomes a lot more serialised. But what do you make of this first half of season 8 of the X-Files?
I actually really love the first half of season 8 of the X-Files. I really love the entire season, and the sort of equation or reason that I come to that is, of course, everybody loves Mulder and Scully together. That is what the X-Files very much became, and we all love that so much. But that wasn't going to continue under the terms that it had been going for the previous 7 seasons, right? Mm-hmm. So I really like the 8th season, particularly the first half, because I feel like it regrounds the series in very sturdy, sort of dark explorations of horror. If you look at the 7th season, for example, which I like a lot, and I show many of those episodes to my son when I was introducing him to the X-Files, because they weren't sort of straight up horror. The X-Files had become something very different by season 7 than what it was in season 1. And season 7 had things like the Amazing Marlene, Goldberg variations, Fight Club, Hollywood AD. More whimsical. The genie one, just hate. I don't know if I said that right. But things that weren't really horror anymore. It had gone off into a different kind of direction. And then you land in season 8, and boom, you're just hitting, solid, doubles and triples with these horror stories. You've got Roadrunners and Red Rum, and was it Invocation, and just these really good Badla horror stories. Yeah. I'm thinking about all of them. So for me as a horror fan, it's like, wow, this is great. This is like a total regrounding of the X-Files. It's going sort of back to the beginning, not in terms of like finding footing, but in terms of thematically dealing with the genre of horror. So I really love it, and I can go back and watch these anytime because I feel like the narrative becomes more important again, rather than stories through which we view the lens of Mulder and Scully. Suddenly now we're really almost like first season style horror stories dealing with those things.
What's been apparent to me in these first 12 episodes, I've watched them all. I actually watched Badla earlier today. So I've watched them slightly out of order on occasion. If I'm recording Red Room, for example,
right,
it wasn't quite in time with what I was watching. But I watched Badla last night, and what fascinates me with this season and the way that they take that microscope off Mulder and Scully is that Doggett's character is, and I've mentioned this a few times now, where he wants to get to the point of, I just want to solve the case, as in, I want to get the bad guy, arrest him, and put him in prison. And he's not really that concerned about, the whys of it. He's not really concerned about, if it is a genie going up a crevice, then he's more mortified and kind of, what you're talking about, I don't understand this, but I want to just get to the end of it. And I find that fascinating with Scully as well, because Scully, I mentioned this in Red Room, seems to be a character that will flip between kind of almost like a spiritual questioning of asking why you feel like that in the case of Red Room. Why do you think you're getting this second chance? Or the scientific explanation. And there's not that clash between Mulder and Scully that would normally have, the kind of bite between of Mulder saying something absolutely ridiculous and Scully going, well, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
So, I think that the grounding, like you say, for the horror stuff, I think really works in that regard. I mean, something like The Gift, which was obviously last episode, is pure with that. It's there's no Scully in that episode bar flashback. So the fact that they have to find that and use Doggett in that way, I mean, a lot of people will have allusions to Frank Black in Millennium,
right?
But he does suit that mold better and that grounding better with the body horror aspect of it. Is that what you feel with that as well?
I do. I mean, it's so hard because obviously everybody loves Mulder and Scully, but again, you sort of have to come. You can't resist the laws of physics. It wasn't going to happen, right? Yeah. David Duchovny was not going to be here. We still wanted more X-Files. And I always say, I would be hard pressed to think of a better choice, both in terms of the actor and the character they brought in to sort of succeed him here. Because Doggett, to me, my wife always calls him, she's like, here comes Detective Meat and Potatoes, and I love that. And it's so great because it sort of asks us, it almost puts us into the spot where we're joining the X-Files. It's like he's a total noob, right? He doesn't know about all this stuff. He doesn't know about the conspiracy and the monsters and all that stuff. And so he's there and he's almost having our reactions at some point. And that becomes very interesting, I think, and I think you see it in Medusa, from the sense of what's it like to have to build trust with somebody who's your partner, where you don't really even understand the game. Can you have trust in your partner? What does that trust look like when you don't even understand the rules of what's happening? And like I'm just a huge fan of Via Negativa. I think that has some of the most incredible horror imagery in the whole series. And again, that's sort of Doggett's, dark night of the soul, some really, really scary stuff in there. And I think, you almost couldn't do that with Mulder at this point, because, Mulder's Dark Night of the Soul was maybe back in season 3 with Grotesque or something like that, right? So you don't have the opportunity to tell a story like that in season 8 of the X-Files unless you have, Detective Meat and Potatoes come in. And so I love Doggett. I mean, I'm able to square in my head. It's like, okay, there's the Mulder and Scully years, which I absolutely love. But then look, this is really good. It's not the same, but it's really good, And so I'm totally happy with season 8 in particular. I mean, I have to rethink season 9. I haven't revisited those in a while, but season 8 I loved.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Season 8 is up there. We had a Patreon roundtable recently of people's favourite seasons, and it's interesting how different people view things. And I've always liked season 8 anyway.
Yeah.
I think as a kid growing up, seeing that the T-1000 was going to be on the X-Files was kind of like my thing. It was, oh, right, okay, I'm getting T-1000. So that instantly helped me, because Mulder is my favourite character.
Sure.
He is my favourite character.
Me too.
But I can pass, similar to what you're saying, I can pass the two things together. What about the back end of this season then? Because this is pretty much, I think this is the last credits where we get, it's kind of like the Scully and Doggett show, really, and even this episode even alludes to that. They even, at the beginning of the episode, they say Scully, Doggett. And this before then the credits will move on and we'll get David Duchovny in the back half of the season. How do you pass the two? How do you have, obviously, the 12 episodes, like you say, the horror aspect, the kind of the meat and potatoes episodes, things like Sure Kill and Salvage and things like that, where we're now moving into, some of the more mythological episodes, such as Vienen and Permanum and This Is Not Happening, and all that kind of thing. So what about the back half of the season before we talk about Medusa?
I think, it's really hard. I mean, I think there were difficult creative decisions to be made, because it's like, we obviously want David Duchovny to come back because Mulder is the X-Files. And yet, if you're trying to create and set up the longevity of the series, and he's not going to be available because, like, he wasn't really in season 9, right? So it's like, do we, do we gently glide out with kind of him half in, half out, or do we commit to our new paradigm? And I think that's a very difficult creative choice. And, of course I wanted Mulder to come back and be fully engaged in the X-Files. But there's a part of me that really prefers the first half of season 8 because it's like we're committing to this new thing. It's new, but it's also kind of regrounded. We've kind of landed again back in what the X-Files started at, this meditation upon these scary things in society, and having these kind of metaphors or comparisons between sort of human life and sort of monster life, which I want to talk about in Medusa, what I think Frank Spotnitz is really doing here. And I really like that. For me, that paradigm works. Like, I could have had like 4 or 5 seasons of Scully Doggett, and then David Duchovny wanted to come back so we could cap it off for a series finale. Okay, yeah, bring him back, and then we could have had the reunion, and it's all be in it. But I think I almost prefer to just chart off into this new territory, and so I really like the first half of season 8. But then of course the ground shifts under us again because Monica Reyes comes in, and we're thinking, oh, is she a Scully replacement? And then it's like, no, they're the 3 of them, and how does that fit together? And, I just think that's very difficult creatively to be stuck sort of between wanting 2 things very much, which is we want to make this show live and endure and be great, but we also want to make sure we honor our history and how great it was, and also do that, because then it's just sort of schizophrenic, so I think that's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to do that. I mean, I could conceive of a series where you had all 4 of the characters and were alternating weeks and kind of stories with the teams. I mean, to me that would have been fantastic, but it didn't quite get there. So it's like, okay, so he's the Mulder replacement, so is Scully just hanging around until we can replace her, and then what is it? So that's probably a really long-winded and confusing answer, but I think...
No, I get it. I think we discussed on the Xcast about season 6 being similar. If you had a kind of precedent on this, that you would see season 6 through Spender's and Fowley's eyes, for example, which you don't see.
Right.
You don't have an episode where Spender's on an X-File.
Right.
It's all about Mulder and Scully off the X-Files, and you get episodes like Drive. So it's a show that's very focused on the Mulder and Scully dynamic.
Right.
And to start then, because of the production issues and the things that have been put in their way over these next couple of years, it's a very difficult position for them to be in. And for them to be having, as you say, having all these production issues, and how do you mismatch everyone together? I don't envy them at all.
I think
either. If they had done something in season 6, then it might have been an easier ride. But they were doing something brand new here.
I agree. I mean, that's such a good way of putting it. I mean, I do think it's very interesting because I went back and I watched, Medusa right before we spoke and took notes and everything. I thought, dang, this is just a really solid, good episode. And that sort of squares with how I look at it now. I think the X-Files is still really good in season 8. You think, could it have gone on beyond season 9? Was it possible, or was it a shifting of the times? 9/11 changed a lot of things. It's like, oh, so, even if they had like said, okay, we're really going to commit to Doggett and Scully, and that becomes the new partnership, would that have even helped? I mean, you don't know. I mean, I guess all I can say is, like, I look back and I really enjoy this season.
Right, well, let's start talk about what we're meant to be talking about, which is Medusa, which was season 8, episode 12. As you alluded to, written by Frank Spotnitz and directed by Richard Compton. Original air date was the 11th of February 2001. And the IMDb rating for this episode, based on 2,315 votes, is a 7.4, so quite low in regards to some of the seasons. Like Red Rum got quite high, it was in the 8s and things, but If you were to give this a rating, what would you give it, and what are your general thoughts on this episode? You've alluded to some thoughts anyway already, but what would you generally think about this episode?
Well, I really like Medusa. I remember watching it when it aired, thinking, oh, this was a really good, solid horror show. And I liked what it is doing. We can talk about what I feel like it's doing. So I think I would actually probably rate it maybe higher than a 7.4. I might rate it closer to 8. I think that I think at some point maybe Frank Spots had said it wasn't his favorite of the ones he wrote, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, and I can see that, because I do think you get to a point in 8 years in. You've written a lot of stories. We've seen a lot of monsters in isolated location stories. The threshold, it gets higher to reach that threshold of success, because you're sort of brushing up against everything you've done in the past, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that there are sort of enough interesting points seated here that make the episode really worth revisiting. And a couple of those things are, I kind of feel like there are, this is like the International Month of Women, right? Or March, yeah. I think. So, I was looking at that, and I was looking at Dr. Kaibo, and I was looking at Scully, and I was looking at sort of the gender politics and how Lieutenant Bianco was trying to separate Doggett from Scully, looking at how the transit guy was sort of talking to Scully. And I thought, again, this is why people love the X-Files. I think that I read something on Facebook the other day. It said, Dana Scully walked so that the women on TV now can run. I think there was a meme or something like that. It's so true. She was dealing with all of these gender issues throughout the show, and I think there's a thread of that in here. But I also liked the comparison, which we can get to, I think, between like the monster underground and the monster on the surface, which we can talk more about. But
yeah.
So I would actually rate it a little higher. I think it's one of those episodes that you can really enjoy on a very surface level, but if you stop and really look at it, you're like, oh wow, there's actually some really incredibly interesting stuff there. So I've always liked it. To me, it ends, I'm like, oh, I'm sort of very, I walk out of it like very happy, like I got what I wanted out of it, So I don't know. I mean, so is that a 7.5 or is that an 8? I mean, it's all,
It's all relative and in context, isn't it?
Right, it is. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm the same. I would say I would probably give it around a 7.5 to 8. If I was push it for an 8, I think. And in the mailbag, there's a comment which I kind of agree with. It's really, really strong for about 30 minutes, and in the last 10, 15 minutes, it kind of drops off a little bit.
Yeah, that's a fair criticism, I think.
Yeah, so we'll look into that shortly. And as you say, some of the gender politics on that I didn't really think about, but as soon as you started saying it, I can see that, and and it brings up some interesting debates. There is the conversation that we need to have, as you say, from previous X-Files. So you think about likes of Ice and Firewalker, right. Darkness Falls, FMS Escalata, those type of episodes, which it's not necessarily competing against, because it's a very different role that Doggett is situated in here. He's very much kind of like your action hero going down into the depths. So I think it's fascinating from that point of view that I think it's very, very solid. And as I say, moving into the next episode, I think it's a good one to finish. And I was quite surprised, and I think this was back in the day when we were during the pandemic actually, where Carl Sweeney was putting an episode on a day and asking for comments every single day. And when they got to Medusa, thinking, during the pandemic, when we thought it was going to be 3 weeks and we were into season 8, we're still in for the long haul now. So we got to Medusa, and I was quite surprised at how many negative responses there was at that point. But I think it's a really strong episode. Let's just talk very briefly about the cold open first, right. And then we can talk about some of the characters they introduced after the credits. But I think it's a very strong opening with this cop on the subway platform and the suspected robber. It gives you an indication of it's late at night and they must have had a spate of these. And some of as you say, the body horror aspect of the season kind of kicks in with the final moment. I mean, what as an opening sequence, how do you rate this?
I like it, but I don't love it, and I like it for a couple reasons. I think it starts to sort of build suspense because this guy is standing on the platform watching somebody else, and it kind of leads us to think one thing is going to happen, because it ends like with him on the ground and somebody coming at him. You think, what's that guy going to do to him? It's a mutant of the week, but it's not really that. So it's kind of like a misdirect. And on one hand, I like that it's a misdirect, but on the other hand, I think it might be the symptom of sort of not knowing, like, creatively, like, how to start the story, if that makes sense. So I guess I'm a little mixed on. I mean, I really like a shot in it. Like, there's the shot where you're looking at the back of the train and it just goes into blackness, like the train car like recedes, and there's blackness all right. It could be like in deep space, there's nothing there. And I kind of love that. It's kind of like sailing into the great unknown. What has happened on this train? So, I really like the visuals. I like the sense of paranoia. Like, overall, with X-Files openings, I mean, because, some of the openings for the series are just, absolutely phenomenal in terms of camera movement and complexity and what occurs and, terror and all that. I don't think the open is particularly one of the X-Files' best, though I do love that shot.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's certain openings of episodes which I don't remember. This one was a particular one, even though I do like the episode. Mm-hmm. I do remember it more for the subway scenes themselves later on than actually these moments. So I think it does its job, but at the same time it's a bit thing. So we come out of the opening, and this is where obviously we'll start to talk a little bit more about the characters. So we get the introduction, as I say, they actually say Scully and Doggett. I don't think they said that in any of the previous episodes. It's always been, this is Agent Dana Scully, or this is Agent Doggett, and this is, so they've kind of used that as for the first time. And they meet the Deputy Chief Karras. Now we can talk about him in general for his arc in this episode first, and then obviously move on to Bianco and stuff. He's purely there as very antagonistic. He's got a slight conspiratorial aspect to it, right. And also he's our ticking time bomb in that 4 o'clock, which he must say about 7 times in this episode. So as a character, and he was in Next Generation is what I remember him from, and then I realised as well today that he was in Scrubs as well, wasn't he? He was one of the main guys in Scrubs. But yeah, Karras as a character, he's quite one-dimensional in a way, but as you say, with some of the things he's saying, he's very antagonistic towards Scully,
right?
Especially, and you were saying about the Bianco thing being like the Doggett thing as well. So we can talk about them in tandem if you like. But what do you think about those two characters?
So I actually think they really work well together in tandem, because I think they embody sort of the deeper story of Medusa. And you're absolutely right about the 4 o'clock. Like, that's our tension. Like, rush hour is coming. We have to do this. And to me, watching these characters and watching Scully and Doggett interact with them, I was reminded of Kolchak, the Night Stalker. And of course, that's a series that has been called, sort of a proto X-Files, very important to Chris Carter. He watched it when he was young. But the whole idea of Kolchak, the Night Stalker, was sort of like, you can't fight City Hall or one guy against City Hall, right? And and then, of course, Frank Spotnitz went on to work on the reboot of The Night Stalker. So it's really interesting that he did this episode, because I think the subtext here at which these two characters play into, it comes down to like sort of 2 different lines. One is the one that Scully says at the end, which is, well, the trains ran on time. And that goes back to a statement that became famous in the I don't know if it was 30s or 40s, but around Mussolini's Italy. For apologists for fascist Italy, when someone said, oh, it's terrible, American apologists or sympathizers would say, yeah, but the train sure run on time, meaning that Mussolini may be a dictator, but he's operating the bureaucracy, right? So we have that kind of comparison here. And then I tie that with another line. I was stunned that I'd never noticed it before, but at some point, Scully, and this is earlier than that, Scully early on in the episode says, the third rail is closing down. The third rail means 2 things. Obviously, they're in a subway, and the third rail is the middle rail with the electricity. The third rail is also shorthand in America for things politicians won't touch. The third rail.
Yeah.
The thing, and for us, that's things like don't mess with Social Security. There are things that politicians don't take, the third rail. And so, you have early on her saying the third rail is closing down, and later on saying the trains run on time. And suddenly you have your whole thematic arc of Medusa in here, which is that, the trains have to run. That's what they're there to do. And that's closing down. And it can't close down because they will not be able to hold on to their power. City Hall will not be able to hold on to its power if the third rail closes down. People will not stand for that. And at the end, it's that, well, this guy endangered all those people, Doggett says. And Scully's like, the trains ran on time, right? Nobody cares because the trains ran on time. And I think that, this is a real X-Files type story, and that it's kind of helping us understand how society works, sort of levels of order, what we're willing to accept and not accept. People want to get home. I've got how many hundreds of thousands of people who want to get home on time. That's what they're worried about, right? And the successful politician, the successful City Hall is going to be the one who does that. And had that not happened, what would have happened? What would have happened in Boston? It would have been a disaster. So, these characters are almost like sort of Watergate type characters in a way, and it is almost like a conspiracy, but a much more grounded, conspiracy than the myth arc conspiracy. It's the police, this guy, and the mayor, they know something bad is happening, but the train's got to run on time, and they're not going to touch the third rail. The third rail's closing down. That's a problem. Right? so for me, it's oh, wow, this all fits together. And so we've got, this classic X-Files story that's sort of about how we live. And I know some people say, well, these characters are very cliched. I read something that said the transit guy is, like the mayor in Jaws. And I was like, yeah, probably. And so we've seen him before, but the mayor in Jaws was so important because that was the Watergate era. And the Watergate era is also what the X-Files was born out of, and also what Kolchak was, the series after the first two movies, that it was kind of born out of that era too, right? So it's it all kind of ties together for me. And so I don't bother them. It's I expect them to be there. They're the things that are holding up the works. They know exactly what they're there to do, and we might cast them as villains, but again, look at it from their perspective. What would have happened? What would have happened to society? What would have happened to Boston? If they didn't meet that deadline.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I tell you what, it's something that you said there which sparked an interesting thought in my head that, especially with watching the past 12 episodes of late, is that idea of suppression. So rather than the conspiratorial aspect of they've got these three bodies, there's a suppression of that he knows it's there, but he's just going to keep it suppressed. Right. In The Gift, Doggett and Skinner decide to suppress the fact that they actually went and did that actual case, right? Because it wasn't going to be worth anything. And in Red Rum, the whole idea of Red Rum was that Martin Wells suppressed some evidence, which then led to sort of people. So it's interesting that there's also that suppression stuff, which I never really, obviously, just until then, really clicked on. So I thought that's really, really intriguing. Having the two characters, let's come at this from a different point of view then, with the lieutenant and the transit guy, is Scully's got to find a way of actually being out of the subway because she's obviously protecting her unborn child. Right. So you've got that playing on there, but you've also, as you say, you've got the two characters, the lieutenant and the actual transit guy, actually being there and being the foils between the two of them, and even to the point where Bianco is trying to, and I'm sure that the gender politics thing will come in here, but he at one point is saying, why are you trusting her up above? He shouldn't be trusting her up above. But the way that Doggett actually approaches in the very start of this episode as well, the way that he says, I'm just here for the ride, really. I'm here for, she's the expert, let her get on with stuff. She's the boss. And, he's done that a couple of times of late as well. And then he himself is a bit like, are you not coming down? You're the expert. So there's the element and also as well at the end of the episode where there's still that not telling him about the pregnancy.
Right.
So there's a lot going on at play, and I think that Spotnitz does a good job of actually mixing that and having a bit of an ambiguity over what the motives are for those reasons.
I think so too, and I think one of the things that fascinates me about the X-Files and Millennium, and the X-Files gives us two examples in a lead role, is this idea of sort of the Chris Carter male. I think there's like a distinctive version of the Chris Carter male. Mulder, Frank Black, and Doggett. And one of the great things about each of those men is that they don't typically take the bait with a gender issue like that. It's clear that what Bianco is doing to Doggett is trying to catalyze some atavistic male fear of having a woman lead him. That's the shiv he's pressing, and Doggett's just not having it. It's clear that Doggett respects Scully. I mean, I think he is taken back by her decision not to come down, but I think what this episode is about, in some sense, is his understanding that she still has his back. Whether she's there or not. So it strengthens the partnership rather than weakens it. And again, Scully, what she does in this episode and sort of how she is, people keep wanting to make her the villain, right? Bianco wants her to be the villain. And, it's not just in terms of her female nature, so that he can use that, but also science. Again, being post-pandemic now, it's impossible not to get this vibe, which we wouldn't have picked up before, where they're talking about what's taking science so long. It's like, it's clear. It's like, who are our scapegoats here? Women and science. Right? Why aren't women and science, covering this up for us, and what's taking so long, and we're going to die, and we need some real good old-fashioned male leadership here. So to me, that whole thing is just incredibly interesting, especially because then it becomes two women scientists who suss out what it is and come to the answer together, one a marine biologist and one Scully. And I guess you could say it's radical, given what a masculinized culture America is. It's really radical that this episode says, with no hedging, Doggett, our alpha male, you're just the eyes and ears, but Scully's the brain. Scully's the brain. I mean, that's what I really like about this setup of this episode so much. She's in the command center. She is the brain. She's processing everything. She's figuring it out. And Doggett is a physical presence. And I'm not trying to say that to diminish Doggett. I like him, as I said, but I just really like this notion. And again, I think that's absolutely radical in so masculinized a culture to say, well, we have the woman is the brain, and as her secondary brain is another woman, right?
Yeah.
And they literally say, "Dog, you're just going to be my eyes and ears down here."
And flip that on its side as well. That Doggett gets knocked down about 3 times. So it's not even saying that he's down there, he's going to be the hero of the piece.
Right.
He gets knocked over, well, twice, isn't it? He gets knocked over with the subway guy he was actually trying to rob, and then Bianco knocks him out later on, and obviously to the point of showcasing that Scully is a bit concerned about Doggett at that point, because she thinks, well, he hasn't been alive for a while.
Right.
He hasn't been around for a while. So they're not even portraying Doggett as this all gun-ho action hero is going to run after somebody in a train corridor. So I think that's really nice as well, nice nuance.
Yeah, I really like that whole aspect of the story. I like the idea of her being in the command center and having to process all the facts, process both the mystery and the antagonism from sort of the sound like a radical feminist, but the patriarchy. But I mean, that's what it is, right? That's what this is. I mean, that's clearly what it is. And so I love moments where the X-Files sort of gets to things like that. And it's clear, that Scully is just an absolute, trailblazer in terms of American television. I think, I mean, it's sad that we have to have that discussion, in 2022, but clearly we do, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So no, I love that. So I mean, the characters, Bianca and I can never remember the transit guy's name. What is his name?
He's Chief Karras.
Karras. Okay. So I mean, in a sense, they're two-dimensional because it's clear that they are there to be impediments. But on the other hand, I don't think that that's unrealistic. That they're there to make sure the trains run on time. I mean, they're there as sort of tools of, order, not really interested in saving a particular life or finding out what this is. They just want the trains to run on time. So I think they really work. I mean, I think they really work, but I guess I could see people say, well, they're not really very nuanced. But I guess then the question becomes, do they need to be? Right?
Yeah.
Do you need any more than this, right? To get sort of the essence of what the role they play in the story. And I don't think so.
Yeah, no, and I think it's an interesting point. I mean, yes, there is an element of, and I have this problem with this episode as well, of repeating several times about running the time to run on time. It is sledgehammered on the top of your head, and I do get a little bit frustrated. It's not as bad as My Baby, but I do get frustrated a little bit with Agent Doggett and Agent Scully all the time. It's like there's got to be a friendly kind of push through to say John at least one point, and it's actually someone like Skinner actually starts to say John before Scully does, and I think that's right. But it's just on this episode particularly that you could probably have a little tick sheet of how many times they actually call themselves Agent Doggett or Agent Scully.
Oh, wow.
It can get a little bit frustrating. But that's just a minor gripe, really. It also occurred to me on rewatching this episode of late is that it's very much a time capsule as well because of 9/11, like you mentioned, and of the pandemic as well, that I don't think this kind of episode could be written in the same way anymore. It definitely feels like a time capsule for that kind of era, really.
I think so too. And I've got to say, like, the setup is just absolutely perfect. You've got a diverse team going down into a dark, isolated setting to deal with something monstrous. I mean, the horror, just the horror setup of that is like textbook perfect. And then you have the person above who's the brain kind of leading them through it. And then, of course, the hard part watching Medusa today, I mean, I've probably seen it like 6 or 7 times, so it's hard to remember what the surprise was like. But when, golly, what is his name? Melnick, when his arm like sort of sizzles, like, I remember the first time I watched, I was like, what? What's going on? That was like, today that doesn't feel as potent because I remember the story, I know it's going to happen. But the first time I watched it was like, what? It was a jolt. It's like it's itching, it's burning, something's happening. And then you look at him and his whole arm sort of lights up and then leaves behind, gore. So it is hard on retrospect to probably give the episode the creds it deserves for being shocking, because that was kind of shocking. I've read some people like, well, the monster's just not like that interesting, but it was pretty shocking at the time. It was pretty shocking. Today we might say, oh, the special effects don't hold up as well, but at the time, just watching it, live happening on TV, one night you turn on, you watch the X-Files, and and then this happens, you're like, holy cow. So I think there's that aspect too, maybe of Medusa that doesn't get enough credit, is the fact that it was kind of shocking when it started, when it aired the first time. So maybe that aspect of it is like sort of been relegated to time capsule too, and now we just see it as sort of more routine.
Yeah, that could actually could well be. I think that the conversation around is the monster, it's not a memorable monster by any stretch of the imagination. It's just nature,
right.
So it's something that via nature that and it's a mystery as well. So on top of the horror aspect is like what sets it off is a big question right through the whole episode. Mm-hmm. It's like this could go off at any time. Well, what is it? What is it that can actually cause this to happen? What do you think to the solution with the child as well, with the regards to like its sweat that actually is the conductor on this? Do you think that works as a MacGuffin to get us through to the end of the episode?
It does. I don't think it's one of the best ones, but I see this as, I see the whole episode as being, part of this X-Files kind of meditation about like how we live. So I have to go back to, the flu command and this idea that the host raises of like, oh my gosh, it's like sewage. Like, it's like, nobody wants to think about that. we flush the toilet, the stuff goes away, and we don't want to think about it past that, right? But like society needs to think about it. And like the host kind of takes us behind that in a very uncomfortable way, right? And I think Medusa, what's interesting to me is exactly what she said. It's nature. And so we, on one hand, we have, people saying, this machine we've built, which is a machine, must constantly function. The machine must never stop. And yet at the same time, we have forces outside that machine that don't want to bend to the machine and that maybe are stronger than the machine. And that's what nature is. So it's the idea of sort of nature coming in and saying, that machine we've built, which we're so proud of and which has to work, maybe it's not so bulletproof or foolproof as we thought. So, maybe Medusa is that idea in a bit of a more minor key than the host, but I think it's there. And so I think that whole paradigm works here. I like it. I mean, again, I feel like, the teaser and the appearance of the little boy and learning that, he doesn't sweat as much, so that's why he's alive. It does feel a little too neat to me. The teaser feels like a little off point and the resolution feels a little too neat. But between those things, we've got, the trains must run on time in the third rail, which I love. We've got the gender politics. And then we've got this idea about nature versus like how we've built our societies. And I mean, we're dependent on those trains. We are dependent. We cannot get to work. We cannot get home without those. We have become dependent on the thing we've created. And that thing is not as strong as nature.
Yeah, it comes down to that, doesn't it? A lot on a lot of it. And I think that may be part, as you say, part of the criticism is that it's neatly tied in a bow, and there is an aspect of Doggett's been sweating for a long time, so it doesn't really affect him too much. Right. So there's almost a second half rewrite needed to be there that would have helped it along a bit, and I think that's probably where it does fall down for me. As you say, the stuff with Bianco and Karis is really, really intriguing. This was probably the biggest spend they had for a while as well. They actually built the set itself. Wow. So it's quite an expensive shoot. And I think Robert Patrick has said it was one of the biggest down things he'd seen, apparently.
I mean, it looks great. It looks great.
It does look really good. Yeah, it's a really good sequence. And as I say, having this thing underneath and buried underneath and having like areas where you don't know, there's like the where the bodies are found, for example, that's all covered up and stuff like that, which I think is really effective. And obviously some of the direction as well. I think that some of the scenes and the way that it's filmed and using the whole flashlight stuff and things really works to its credit as well.
I mean, it looks great. I mean, and that's, that's not something to be said lightly. I mean, when I wrote horror films of the 90s, the 90s was a really rough time for horror films. And you have to look at the X-Files as a reason why. Because why would you go out on a Friday night, and go see something where you have no idea what the quality is going to be, right? When, you're in the third season of the X-Files and you sort of like, at this point, what the quality is. And then, of course, I moved to Sunday nights. But the idea is still solid. Why go spend money on that when you're going to see really essentially a movie every week on the X-Files? And, and the X-Files, by sheer, power of staying on for so long, handled so many horror concepts. So it's like, again, so that's another reason. It's like, it looks like a movie. It moves like a movie. and it's dealing with the ideas that that movies are, and doing it better and with more thought, right? And so, a story like this, I mean, to go back and revisit it, I watched it on Hulu. I mean, it looks fantastic. It looks amazing. It looks like a motion picture. I think, sometimes we forget that before the X-Files, not much on television looked that way and moved that way, where, the mise-en-scène and the lighting are such crucial parts of what is being transmitted to the audience. And for me, that's a perpetual joy of this series. And so something like this, I still rated this episode really high, but I think that the teaser is a little off point. And the little boy showing up in sweat, and the dog is sweating, just like you said. Those are things I probably have questions on, but it's like you kind of get swept away by the whole thing. It looks so good. The acting is so good. It's got layers of meaning, like I've discussed. And it's like, okay, so, it's stuck most of the landing, but maybe not that. But again, you got to go back and think about that, like turning on TV and, in the year 2000 and seeing, or 2001 and seeing this, seeing something that moves like a movie, has shocking special effects like a movie, is scary, is well performed, incredibly believable.
It's 20 odd episodes of TV, isn't it, a season? So the fact that, they have to quickly run through these, and X-Files, as you know,
right,
has done that for years, and has always had that film-esque quality to it. And I think that especially some of the moments in this episode where they'll get some of the lighting on Bianco when we reveal that he's got the green substance on him.
Right.
Yes, there is calls back to, say, Darkness Falls, for example, but you do have that, and when Doggett comes up, and yes, and this is always going to come from an X-Files fan. You're always going to find stuff like this in your own head. But like even Doggett wearing the headset, which is very Pusher, you're always going to find those, because that's just the way that television is, and it's eight seasons.
Right.
But I do think that some of the way that they filmed this was really good. I thought the direction was really, really good from Richard Compton. I thought
so too. I think altogether, the synthesis of it all, for me, as I said, I came away sort of very pleased. Now that doesn't mean I didn't have certain questions, but I come away from it's yeah, that was solid. That was really solid. That was good.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, at some point you're in the 8th season, and X-Files is like a procedural, and so you're always going to talk in the vernacular of a procedural. And after 8 seasons, that kind of becomes tiring. It's like, oh, it's another procedural, and there's the people who's against, who the bureaucracy that's against them, and the people hiding something, and so all those things do start to become more familiar. And so it's like the X-Files has a higher or steeper hill to climb, whereas if we saw this one in the 2nd season, we all might be absolutely blown away by it. Wow.
Or even if you've seen this episode in another show, because this could quite easily be moved from X-Files into another territory, really. It could quite easily form a police procedural in some ways, that there's something underneath there. You could do that. It would still, and from a procedural point of view, and this is not a diss on procedural television, because I do like to watch them, but a lot of procedural stuff is very much bread and butter, or you stick on and watch and let it flow over you.
Right.
I still think this would be a high bar from just a normal procedural television show.
I think so too.
That's part of the thing. And X-Files, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, is that it's such a high standard that when we do get a standard procedural, we've had Sure Kill and Salvage. Now, these are 2 episodes that are quite derided on occasion. A lot of it is to do that some people say, I can't remember which one's which I understand that to a degree. But they are very procedural element, and Doggett, Scully, go do a case, early seasons of Mulder and Scully doing kind of thing. And they've got that high bar to attain to. But again, if I was to refer this to another TV show, then it might well be a lot higher than what we would consider to be. And I think that's the key to these type of episodes.
I think it is too. I mean, I think that we hold the X-Files to an incredibly high standard of quality. I remember, I wrote my book, Terror Television, and it was so I think I covered the X-Files through 1999. I had the 10 best horror TV series at the end, and X-Files was clearly number one. And one of the things I said was from 1993 to 1999. I mean, it just consistently delivered the goods, pretty much every single week. I mean, it's so consistently good, at least for those first 5 or 6 seasons, that you kind of get spoiled by that. I mean, I used to really not like the 7th season. Thought, something happened there. But then, I go back and I watch it. No, that was good. It was just that my expectations were different then, watching it sort of in sequence, than they are now. And I go back and I really enjoy those episodes. Yeah. But something like Medusa, which you think, well, it's not like a marquee type episode. It's not one, it's not the postmodern Prometheus. It's not Home. It's not Bad Blood. It may not even be Folia, but right? But it's damn good. You know what I mean? It's damn good. And which is even more shocking because today we've moved to the model where it's like, we're going to produce, 6 or 8 episodes of something and, call it a day. And, not like, we're going to do 24 of these and the bar is going to be so high. Because let's face it, that's what the X-Files was doing year after year. I mean, that's huge. That is a huge thing. So I think Medusa is actually quite accomplished. It's just that, if you eat, Thanksgiving turkey every week, and then you get a turkey sandwich one week. I didn't enjoy that turkey sandwich, but it was really a damn good turkey sandwich.
Great analogy. So I think we've covered it pretty much. I'd say that I feel that Penny Johnson was given a bit of a bad ride on this one, if I'm being honest. I think that she didn't really have too much to do, and she's a great actress. Obviously, she turns up in 24 in a few years after this was aired. She's been in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, for example, and she's in The Orville at the moment as well. I think she's a great actress. She's got the CDC element. Now, there is an element on this episode where the CDC are taken out of the loop, which helps the chief, because not having it as a CDC thing, they've checked it. There's no obvious signs of any biological stuff on there. Works in that regard, but it does take Penny Johnson out of it, and I'm a bit disappointed from that, and that's more the fact that I really enjoy her as an actress.
I feel the same way. So when I started up and I remember she was in, I was like, oh great, I'm so glad she's so good. But then nothing really happened after sort of the first trip down that she participated in, and then she was kind of gone and out. And like, if the strands could have been tied together a little tighter, where maybe you had Scully and the marine biologist, Dr. Bowe, I think her name was, and then the other female character down there, and so somehow they all worked it out together instead of being sidelined like that. I think that that then maybe it's sort of discussion of gender and things like that would have been even more complete, because it is weird to have somebody who's such a charismatic performer and who we recognize from a lot of television and who obviously such different roles between 24 and Deep Space. I mean, she's so good, right? And then she's kind of like half in and half out of the episode. It's like that's a little.
She would have been, because obviously 24 wasn't out then, but she would have been in Deep Space Nine, I would have thought, by now, wouldn't she?
That's right.
Season 4 of Deep Space Nine.
So we were in 2001. So Deep Space Nine ended in 99, right? So we would have known her from then. But you're right, we wouldn't have known her from 24 yet, where she was the sort of scheming political first lady, right? Yeah. Lady Macbeth, right? Yeah.
David. You used to always say David.
She's great, right? She's just great, and you feel like, that now today that feels like a missed opportunity. But again, maybe that's hindsight. Maybe that's how I feel today, and wouldn't have been how I felt in 2001.
Yeah, I think it would have been, for me, because of Deep Space Nine, I would have recognised at that point. But I knew her as that character. I didn't know her anything else. But and I think also the fact that there is an element of your horror, that there is this element of losing characters along the way. Right. It doesn't really do that either. It kind of sticks. There is obviously, as you say, with the with Melnick when he gets his arm kind of thing, but it doesn't really go down that route as much as that I thought it might have.
Right.
They could have quite gone down that, you've got all your people in there, and then you'd lose one down the way. So they don't really do that either, which I quite like the fact that they don't do that. But
right, and this, this is sort of a crazy thing to say, but sometimes so for me, it's like the X-Files started out as like very grounded and like a realistic portrayal of these things that are unrealistic, right? But then you get to season 6 and 7, and suddenly we're talking about like, body switches and the Bermuda Triangle. And I like that too, because I'm a big sci-fi fan, but you're moving very much into this overt world of like science fiction themes, a repeating time loop in Monday, it becomes more globally science fiction, right? Stories that you might have seen in Star Trek told through the X-Files, and very well. I mean, I love Monday. I love Dreamland. I get such a kick out of it. But you get to season 8 and something like Medusa, and it is like a much more real. We're back in that more realistic venue. It's like it's not going to be so extreme. It's like in terms of like people dying, it's not going to be, where the hero's fighting a monster in a cave. It's like, no, I'm on a headset in a control room and you're down there. It's just again, I go back to that word grounded. It's like we're pulling this thing back. It's becoming this very grounded meditation on these unusual things. And I think that's a good place for the X-Files to be. If you don't have David Duchovny there, right? Because he covers sort of a multitude of sins with, his askance kind of sense of humor and, and his flights of fancy, that Scully has to play off. You take that out of it and go back to this more grounded thing. And I think an episode like Medusa really works. But again, compare that to, some of the, was it like Triangle or something, which is just crazy by comparison, right? I know, a great episode, but totally different kind of story.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this on the Red Rum episode with Tony, that Red Rum is the only kind of out there sci-fi idea in the entire season. I think that's part of the reason. It's the fact that you can't really do that, but the way that they did with Red Rum was obviously the point of view of Martin Wells and Joe Morton's character. So you've got Doggett coming in and bouncing off that reaction. Right. So it's like, well, what the hell are you talking about? To going backwards in time. Right. Stupid. Kind of that feel to it.
You have to do better than that. Yeah.
So rather than it being more to actually experiencing the thing, we're seeing it from a different viewpoint. And that feels like a standout compared to, like, as you say, season 6, where it seems to be greatest hits of as many sci-fi tropes as you can possibly do. Right. And I've said on the podcast, I love season 6. I'm not as fond of season 7. And then coming back to this, so having the fact that I think I like both ends of the spectrum, and when it becomes a bit more mundane, I think 7 kind of falls in the cracks with that. Right. So the refreshness and the groundedness and the horror aspect of Doggett's character works, and obviously likes the Roadrunners and Bad Law and things like that. So yeah, I find all that fascinating. So before we go into the mailbag, is there anything that you feel like I've not touched upon that we want to jump on about, or do you think we've covered it?
Well, just to go back to the gender thing real quick. So I did write something down, and what the transit guy Chorus is, he says, so like when he goes after Scully, he does based on gender stereotypes. And I picked that out. He says, "You're being irrational here." To Scully, like the most rational person you will ever encounter anywhere, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you're gaslighting me based on what you think I am, not like who I am, So he's like accusing her of being irrational and over emotional, which is just so bizarre. So I did want to say, like, it's just clear that how he's going after her, and then how Bianca goes after Doggett, it's based like on gender things, like trying to convince Doggett, like, you're not being man enough because you're being led around by a woman, and then telling Scully, well, you're just irrational, right? Yeah. So anyway, I wrote that line down. Okay, that fits into the whole thing. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
All right, no problem. Yeah, no, I think it's good that you've pointed that out, actually, the actual term, because it did feel like, we've had previous episodes of the show where you've had the sheriff normally be the sheriff that they come into, and there's moments where Scully's being looked over and been speaking to Mulder, for example. Scully is central to this, and Doggett says that a few times, doesn't he? Like, as I say, I'm just the eyes and ears. She's the boss.
Right.
That kind of thing. It's good, and Doggett does that a lot, and that's what I like. And I know we've repeated a little bit on that, but I like the way that Doggett he doesn't have that gender aspect to him. He doesn't even think about it.
Right.
It's just like, you're the
right.
queen of the X-Files. I'm just here to find Mulder, really. That's his one and only mission, and he'll help Scully along the way, continuing the X-Files on.
Right. No, I agree. It's so good that, he how he handles that here, that he doesn't take the bait. That's like something like Frank Black. Like, people yell at him and like scream at him, and like he never takes the bait in Millennium either, and I love that, and I feel like that's some sort of Chris Carter thing. It's like the Zen of Chris Carter males or something like that. That they are challenged on their whatever masculinity or manhood, but they almost never take the bait. I'm trying to think if they ever did, but they tend not to.
No, definitely. I think the Gift is another example of that. And obviously that's written by Frank Spotnitz as well. So, and Spotnitz generally has a great overview of characters.
Right.
He's got a lovely hold on Mulder and Scully and how they developed, and seeing interviews and listening to him talk. When I was at X-Fest, for example, it was, lovely to hear that he's got all of those characters in his head. And I can imagine, as you say, the Chris Carter aspect of Frank Black and John Doggett here is that Frank Spotnitz will understand that characterization because he's worked with Chris so long.
Frank Spotnitz
seems to get the right kind of person, the right person to do it.
He's amazing. He never lets me down. I see his name and I know that we're going to be into something that is interesting and multi-layered, and I feel like this is there. And I think if anybody, just to wrap up, that it's like I think that's the thing I would want people to see about Medusa. I think it might seem very straightforward because of the horror things we talked about. A bunch of diverse people go down in the tunnel and something horrible happens, right? But like, if you actually kind of scratch the surface and you think about like the gender politics and the third rail, and the trains always have to run on time, that's like there's really interesting stuff there. You just have to sort of be open to the possibilities, as Mulder might tell us. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly what this podcast is about, isn't it? To give people different opinions and thoughts, and look at episodes from a different perspective as well, because I never really thought of that third rail kind of aspect of it, and I've come away with something to think about, and on top of an episode that I already like. So hopefully, we might turn some people who are a bit on the fence with it, and might give it another shot, which is great. So yes, let's go into the mailbag then, and we'll see what a few people have said to us on the Facebook group, the Basement Facebook group, and we shall go and do that now. Right, okay, so Chris Knowles has been on, very similar to what we've just been talking about just before we came into the mailbag. It says, X-Files invaded by a boring, generic network cop show. Sums it up. Frank has pretty much disowned this ep. I should like it because it takes place in the Boston subways, but no. So Chris Knowles isn't.
He's not a fan.
He's not a fan.
That's okay. That's okay.
So that's fine. Andrew Levitt, let's have a bit of a different approach. Andrew Levitt, an underrated gem. Medusa harkens back to the intensity of episodes like Ice and F. Emasculata by placing Scully and Doggett in the middle of a cover-up in the trains tunnels of Boston to create a tense thriller. Like all good X-File episodes, it puts Scully in a situation where she has to use her science rather than her new believer role to discover the cause of the contagion. Doggett works well as her eyes and ears in the tunnel, and his conflict with Lieutenant Bianco as they try to find the source of the contagion amplifies this intensity of the situation. While the actual case of the contagion is a little weak and is never fully explained, the tension between the characters, Scully versus Karras and Doggett versus Bianco, carries the episode, with Gillian Anderson, Robert Patrick and the supporting cast giving great performances. Spotnitz might disown this episode, but he always knew how to best write Doggett and the high stakes of the situation that really makes it a standout episode for me. 8 out of 10. So Andrew's very much with us.
Yeah.
We didn't really say about the thriller aspect. I mean, we said about the time ticking aspect of it, but there is that thriller element, like the final scene where Scully's not running around in tunnel, where Doggett is actually, he realizes that there's a potential issue that it could be potentially spread. it is a little bit weak, but it gives you a little bit of an action piece for him to get that ready.
Right.
It is a bit CG-ish. There's a bit like wonky that way. But as I say, that's probably why it kind of falls off a little bit. But it is Doggett being proactive. It's Doggett is a difficult one to make proactive because of his belief in stuff. So you've got to find ways to make him. And
right.
There is, as I say, that action hero aspect of it. There was a little bit of that in that final scene, wasn't there?
Yes, yeah, and I think that's appropriate because you want him to be effective. You want him to be someone sort of worthy of Scully. He can't just bow to Scully, right?
Yeah.
You want him to respect Scully, but you also want him to have agency. And I think he does. I think he does. And I think they did a particularly good job with that in the first half of season 8.
Yeah, I really, really like the gift
Love
for that
it.
reason.
Yeah.
The fact that the way that Doggett is the one that kind of works out what Mulder was doing when everyone's he's shot somebody, but Doggett comes to understand what happened in the gift of the
right.
Soul Eater. So I really like that. I like the fact that Doggett can do that, and right through some of the episodes, And as I say, I think one of the stuff in this first half for me is likes of Schuylkill, where, and I alluded to this before, where Scully says about someone shooting through a wall, how can they possibly do that? And Doggett almost throws that off and said, well, that's not the issue. The issue is we need to get the bad guy. So there's still agency with that even though he can be blinded by the X-File as such.
Right.
But that doesn't stop him having agency of actually getting to the case.
Right.
Or saving Scully and Roadrunners and stuff like that. He's I hate to say it because I keep saying it during this. I don't know if anyone else has. They probably have, but he's like a dog with a bone, or he's dogged and
he's dogged. Like yeah, I mean that's it, Lieutenant Dogged, right? I mean that's it exactly. Lieutenant Meat and Potatoes. But I mean, there's just something so refreshing and earnest about him. I never think I don't like John Doggett or Robert Patrick or these episodes. I mean, I think I'm in the mood for old school X-Files with Mulder, or I think, hey, I haven't watched one of these with Doggett in a while, and these are good, right? And then I'll get on a track where I want to watch those. I want to watch Via Negativa, or I want to watch The Gift, or what's the one with the lizard person in the tunnels with at the end of the season?
Alone,
or that one, because there you get the whole. You get everybody, right?
It's phenomenal. Paige Schechter as well. So she says that I'm a fan of Medusa, even though it does stall a bit at the end. I really enjoy getting there, but I enjoy getting there so much that I'm not even bothered by that. First, it's a nice way to handle the ongoing story. Scully can't go down there because she's not quite ready to divulge her story to Doggett,
right?
But their relationship has progressed. Beyond that, I enjoyed the general concept, and the bureaucrats were very reminiscent of the taking of film 1, 2, 3, the original, of course. I wouldn't call it a favourite episode, but I would say it's one I always enjoy watching.
Very insightful, I think.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's an episode that, when I saw that there was quite a few bad reviews of it, I was like, all right, well, I really enjoyed it. But it's not an episode I would instantly think to put on, going back to your point about a Doggett episode. I think I would think Doggett, Medusa, good, watch.
Right.
But I wouldn't actively go for it if I wasn't doing a rewatch, I think. So
we ended up watching all of, I think we got through season 8. I don't think we did season 9. And then we did the reunion show with my son. So I'll say this, I knew these episodes, and when we got to season 8, it's like Medusa comes up and I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Right? Let's put it, you see which one is coming up next and who. It's like, you flip off one. It's like, oh, here comes the next. Oh, Joel, that's a good one. You're going to like that one. So I tell her, it's like, you might not automatically think of it. It's like, it's not Bad Blood or Home or Drive or whatever, but it comes up. You're like, oh yeah, that was a good one.
And I think, definitely. I think Paige definitely kind of hits on that. That it is something. It's always an enjoyable watch, and I think her saying is kind of where I feel as well, that it does stall a bit at the end, like I said at the top of the episode. But I actually enjoy the 2/3 of the episode, the 30 minutes before it gets there anyway. So it doesn't give me any bad feelings about it. And the criticism I've had of this episode they, if I was watching it, I wouldn't be thinking about them. So
right, that's how I feel too. I mean, like I said, I came away from like, wow, I really enjoyed that, and I think there was more there than meets the eye.
Yeah, and finally, just to bring us on a downer, Kelly Portnow only sticks in my memory as the officer killed before the opening credits shares my maiden name. Other than that, pretty average and forgettable. So
sad.
So yeah, so a bit of a mixed bag, So, but I think that's fine. I understand that. But it's nice to see that there is, it is a mixed review and people enjoy it still. So that's the main thing. So that's this week for Medusa. Next week we've got Per Manum.
Ooh.
So we are definitely moving into mythology and a different era of the show now in the back half of the season. John, hopefully we'll see you on next season.
I would love that.
If we can find an episode that you might have watched, or dust off and watch one, we'll certainly get you on.
Absolutely, that sounds great.
But until next time, where can people find you? What are you up to at the moment? You've obviously got a lot of books and stuff out. You've worked on quite a few projects, but it's been about a year since we last spoke to you on the podcast. So what are you up to?
So horror films of the 2000s should be coming out sometime this summer. That's my most recent book. I'm working on horror films of the 2010s. I'm still working on my in the late 2000s I created a web series called The House Between, and we have actually begun recording new stories. So that's going to be coming out as like a dramatic podcast, probably sometime in the next year. So it's not available yet, and I think it's going to be under a different name. So and we'll catch everybody up so no one feels like they missed anything from a 10-year-old TV show, web series. But we've sort of reunited the cast. We're telling new stories. So I'm writing those scripts, and we're getting ready to record in a couple weeks the second 11 stories for it. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. But I'm on Twitter, JK Muir. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Medusa. I'd love to hear it. Anybody would want to talk to me about it or what we said here. Disagree with me? Don't do that. So that's basically it. That's sort of what's happening.
Excellent. Well, as always, you can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. I'm on a multitude of podcasts at the moment, on Red Dwarf, on Yellow Jacket, Star Trek Picard. The Time Is Now, we've mentioned Millennium. That's now finished, but you can listen back to the back catalogue of that as well. You can find all the Twitter handles actually on my Twitter bio page. So if you want to have a look at that, so it'll be things like the X_cast and the Yellow Jacket Pod, things like that will all be on there for you to have a look at. We're currently covering Series 6 of Red Dwarf at time of recording. So Red Dwarf will be Shipwrecked and Comatose is the podcast for that, just as a highlight. But yeah, so next week, as I say, we're going to be looking at Per Manum, and I'm not sure who was actually on that. We need to have a look at that anyway. But so remember that this isn't only the only podcast that's on the network. We've got plenty of other shows on here. So most of which I'm on, which is the way things seem to be at the moment. But we'll give you some little clips on that. By all means, if you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, give this show a rating. Come and find us on the X-Files Basement on Facebook as well. But until next time, remember everyone, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This.
Giddy carousel of pop.
By 1989, I'd actually landed a job working at a fashion PR agency called Lynn Franks PR. This particular issue is memorable to me because it was our first smash hits cover for our client, Nana Cherry. They never told you if you get a cover or not. There'd always be this kind of cat and mouse. Well, we'll look at it as a great feature and we'll have to have our own shoot and we'll have to do this, and then there's quite a long period of negotiation and you never really knew if you got the cover until it came out. And I remember, when you go down and see it on the newsstand, it was a fantastic feeling. It just felt like, this is my sort of goal in extra time to win the FA Cup moment.
Chucky Vision, a Chucky podcast.
The introduction, the editorial, if you will, was written by David Campetti, and it shows real love and isn't shy about having a dig at cheap-ass, lazy film adaptations.
Yeah, Campetti is an interesting one as the co-founder of Innovation and also the editor. Yeah, a lot of his editorials are hawking other merch, hawking, the different books and stuff they're putting out, but it never felt too corporate. He has a passion in his voice that he very much is enthusiastic and enjoys that they're getting to adapt these franchises.
It does seem like he's definitely acquired Chucky because he's a fan.
Read and Buried podcast.
The theme this month was an Anne Rule book, so true crime, but not The Stranger Beside Me, which is her big book that broke the world of true crime fiction, non-fiction. True crime fiction, I just said. That's not a sentence.
Yeah.
He fell in love.
Oh.
He's so in love, but still not in love enough to stop using sex workers.
Yeah.
But in love enough to not murder them. So...
Okay.
He's a romantic, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, what a man.
What a dreamy man.
But his actual name was Robert Knickerbocker.
Wow.
Which is like the best surname ever.
Do you think maybe she thought no one's going to believe this is a real name?
Well, yeah, that could have been it.
If I'm wrong, please don't correct me. I don't want to know. I want to know I'm right. Thank you.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The Xcast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.